President Trump signing another round of executive orders Thursday, including new sanctions against the International Criminal Court. President Trump has done this before.
As far as America is concerned, the ICC has no jurisdiction, no legitimacy, and no authority.
In an executive order sanctioning the court, he said it had abused its power by issuing arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister Yoav Gallant. The court alleges they committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. Well, on Thursday, Mr. Netanyahu met top US lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Neither Israel nor the US is a member of the ICC or recognises its jurisdiction.
Is that this decision has been very warmly welcomed by Prime Minister Netanyahu, fresh off the back of his meeting with Donald Trump. They've previously described the court as anti-Semitic and saying its judgment draws false equivalence between Israel and Hamas. So they're very, very pleased to see this from Donald Trump.
Welcome to our deep dive into the world of international justice.
Okay.
Today, we're focusing on the International Criminal Court.
Right.
You might know it as the ICC. Mm-hmm. And it's facing some pretty serious challenges right now.
Yeah.
You've given us a great mix of material to work with, articles, some audio from Human Rights Watch, even some online clips.
Yeah.
It seems like this institution is really under fire right now, so let's try to understand why.
Yeah.
What exactly is the ICC, and why is it causing such a stir?
Well, the ICC is a court of last resort.
Okay.
Which means it steps in when national governments can't or won't prosecute the worst possible crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Things like genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes.
Right.
It's relatively new on the global scene.
Okay.
Only established in 2002.
Oh, wow.
And while it cooperates with the UN, it's actually a completely independent body based in The Hague.
The Hague, right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get that mixed up with the other court there.
Yeah.
It feels like there are a million acronyms when you start looking at international law.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting that the ICC is so young.
Yeah.
Considering the types of crimes it handles are, unfortunately, very old problems.
Mm-hmm.
Why was it created in the first place?
You're right. Those types of crimes have been around forever.
Yeah.
But the ICC was created in direct response to the atrocities of the 1990s.
Ooh, okay.
Specifically what happened in Yugoslavia and Rwanda.
Right.
You had ethnic cleansing, massacres, concentration camps in Yugoslavia,
Oh, gosh.
and a genocide in Rwanda that killed almost 1 million people in just 100 days.
It's hard to even imagine that kind of suffering.
Yeah.
At the time, it felt like the whole world had failed to prevent it.
And that sense of failure, the need to say never again, is exactly what led to the creation of temporary tribunals.
Right.
Similar to what we saw after World War II with the Nuremberg trials.
Yeah.
But the ICC was designed to be a permanent solution,
Okay.
a standing court that's always ready to act.
So a noble goal, for sure.
Hmm.
But even the ICC's creation was controversial, wasn't it?
It was.
The sources you provided definitely suggest there was pushback from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. There was quite a bit of pushback.
Okay.
You have 3 main camps, so to speak.
Okay.
First, you had countries that were enthusiastically supportive.
Mm-hmm.
These were often nations transitioning from dictatorships to democracies, like Argentina.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So who was in the second camp?
The second camp was made up of powerful Western countries,
Okay.
the U.S., the UK, France.
Right.
They supported the idea in theory,
Uh-huh.
but they wanted more control.
Mm-hmm.
One source even described it as wanting to be able to turn the court on and off like a light switch.
Oh, wow.
They didn't want to be subject to its jurisdiction, essentially.
And that kind of leads us to the third camp,
Right.
those who oppose the ICC outright.
Exactly.
Okay.
Repressive regimes, countries like India, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Iran,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't interested in having their leaders held accountable on the international stage.
Right.
And of course, the U.S.,
Yeah.
even though it signed the treaty to create the ICC, never actually ratified it.
That's where we see the idea of American exceptionalism come into play, right?
Yeah,
That the U.S. is somehow above international law.
that's a major factor, yes.
Right.
And there were also concerns about U.S. troops being prosecuted, particularly those involved in peacekeeping operations around the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's even a story about a former U.S. Secretary of Defense demanding a guarantee that no U.S. service member would ever be brought before the court.
That's a pretty bold demand.
Yeah.
So we have this court created with good intentions,
Mm-hmm.
but facing opposition right from the start, particularly from some very powerful nations.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that early opposition has evolved into more concrete threats.
Yes, those early concerns have definitely grown into more serious challenges for the ICC. In fact, right now, it's facing some of the most serious threats to its existence since it was created.
Okay. So the ICC is facing threats, but what does that actually look like?
Well, it goes beyond strongly worded letters, unfortunately.
Okay.
We're seeing actions that directly challenge the ICC's authority and its ability to operate.
Like what?
For example, the U.S. Congress is currently considering a bill that would impose sanctions on ICC officials.
Sanctions? What would that mean for the court?
These sanctions could be quite damaging.
Okay.
They could involve freezing the assets of ICC personnel and imposing travel bans, making it difficult for them to do their work.
Ah, I see.
This actually follows a pattern set by the Trump administration back in 2025
Right.
when they imposed similar sanctions.
Yeah.
It sends a pretty chilling message to anyone who might want to cooperate with the court.
Okay.
Get involved at your own risk.
It sounds like these sanctions are really intended to cripple the ICC financially and make it much harder for them to function.
That's the goal.
Okay.
And it's not just the U.S.
Right.
We've seen other countries taking aggressive steps against the ICC as well.
Like who?
Russia, for example,
Okay.
issued arrest warrants for ICC judges and prosecutors.
Wow. Arrest warrants. That's a huge escalation.
It is.
Okay.
And there's also Israel,
Uh-huh.
which has criminalized cooperation with the ICC after the court issued warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant.
It seems like these countries, all quite powerful on the world stage, are trying to dismantle the very system designed to hold them accountable.
It does seem that way.
Okay.
They claim they have their own systems for investigating these types of crimes. But critics argue that these domestic systems aren't always impartial or effective.
Right.
That's why the ICC, as a court of last resort, is so important.
It's a tricky situation.
Yeah.
The ICC needs to assert its authority,
Mm-hmm.
but doing so can be seen as overstepping,
Right.
especially when dealing with countries that have strong objections.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
The court has to rely on cooperation from its member states,
Okay.
which becomes a lot harder when those states feel threatened.
So what you're saying is that the ICC is caught between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly.
Okay.
It needs to be independent to be effective,
Right.
but that independence makes it vulnerable.
And that tension is at the heart of what's happening right now. The U.S., for instance, has long argued that the ICC could unfairly target American soldiers, despite the U.S. having its own military justice system.
Right.
And we see that same argument being used by Israel, don't we?
That's right.
They say they're capable of investigating themselves, that the ICC is biased against them.
It raises an important question. What happens when a country insists its own justice system is enough,
Right.
even if there are concerns about its impartiality?
So we've talked about the challenges and the threats.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear that the stakes are very high. But are there any potential solutions? Can the ICC weather the storm?
It certainly won't be easy.
Okay.
However, there is some hope.
Okay.
It's important to remember that the ICC has 125 member states, and many of them strongly believe in its mission.
Right.
If they can come together and push back against these attacks,
Okay.
there's a chance the court can survive.
That sounds like a David and Goliath situation
Yeah.
with the ICC representing the underdog fighting for justice.
I think that's a fitting analogy.
Okay.
And this is where public awareness is so crucial.
Right.
The more people understand what's at stake, the more pressure there will be on governments to support international justice.
So what can the average person do to support the ICC?
There are a few things.
Okay.
Staying informed about these issues is key.
Okay.
Supporting organizations that advocate for international justice can also make a difference.
Right.
And most importantly, holding our own leaders accountable,
Okay.
making our voices heard.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping a more just world. Exactly. But what if the ICC doesn't survive?
Wow.
Are there other options, other ways to ensure accountability for these horrific crimes?
That's a crucial question,
Okay.
and one that's being discussed more and more these days.
Yeah.
Some experts believe regional courts could help fill the gap left by a weakened ICC. Others think a more decentralized approach might be needed,
Okay.
with specialized tribunals focused on particular types of crimes,
Right.
like war crimes or crimes into the environment.
So it sounds like there might not be a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
Maybe it would take a combination of approaches depending on the specific context.
That's probably a realistic view.
Okay.
The important thing is that any alternative system upholds the ICC's core principles. Independence, impartiality, and a commitment to due process.
Right.
It's not just about finding any replacement.
Okay.
We need a system that can genuinely deliver justice.
So it's not just about finding a replacement. It's about finding a replacement that can actually do the job and do it fairly.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Otherwise, we risk ending up with another flawed system.
Right.
And ultimately failing to achieve the goal of ending impunity for these serious crimes.
We've talked a lot about the ICC's structure.
Yeah.
The power dynamics surrounding it and the very real threats to its survival.
Mm.
But I think it's crucial to also consider the human side of this story.
Yeah.
What happens to the victims of these terrible crimes if the ICC fails?
It's a question we can't ignore.
Right.
For many victims, the ICC represents their last best hope for justice.
Okay.
It's a chance to see the people responsible for their suffering held accountable. If the ICC is weakened or dismantled, it leaves these victims feeling abandoned and re-traumatized.
Right.
It could even make them more vulnerable to future abuses.
That point really comes across strongly in some of the sources we've been looking at, particularly the material from Human Rights Watch. They talk about how the ICC gives a voice to those who have been silenced, offering them a platform to share their stories and seek some sort of reparation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's not just about punishing the perpetrators.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the harm that was done and helping victims and their families find some sense of closure.
So in a way, it's almost a form of healing.
Yes, the pursuit of justice can be a vital part of the healing process, both for individual victims and for entire communities.
Okay.
It sends a powerful message that their pain is recognized,
Right.
that their experiences matter,
Yeah.
and that society is committed to preventing such atrocities from happening again.
But what if that path to justice is closed off? What if the ICC is no longer a viable option?
That's a very worrying thought.
Yeah.
It could lead to a resurgence of impunity,
Right.
where perpetrators feel emboldened to commit more crimes,
Okay.
knowing that there are unlikely to be consequences. And that creates a vicious cycle of violence and instability.
More violence, more suffering.
Yeah.
Wouldn't this have implications beyond the countries where the ICC is currently involved?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The erosion of international justice norms doesn't stay confined to one region.
Right.
It weakens the rule of law globally and emboldens authoritarian leaders everywhere.
Yeah.
The stakes are incredibly high.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
You know, one of the sources we looked at, I think it was the Human Rights Watch report, talked about the world losing the means to make never again a truly meaningful phrase.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful statement.
It is.
Yeah.
The ICC, for all its flaws,
Right.
represents our collective commitment to preventing the horrors of the past from repeating.
Okay.
If we abandon that commitment, we risk betraying not only past victims, but also future generations.
It's a heavy responsibility to carry.
Yeah.
But it's also a reminder that we all have a role to play in building a more just and peaceful world.
Absolutely.
We've talked about the potential for alternative models.
Right. But realistically, are there any that could truly replace the ICC?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer.
Okay.
We need to be thinking creatively about new mechanisms for accountability systems that are more resilient, more inclusive, and better equipped to deal with the challenges of the 21st century.
It sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is.
Okay.
But it's an absolutely essential one.
Right.
We need to be having these conversations not as passive observers, but as active participants. We need to demand more from our leaders and hold them accountable for upholding international law and human rights.
So what you're saying is that this isn't just a job for diplomats and lawyers.
Exactly.
It's something that concerns all of us.
It absolutely does.
Right.
The future of international justice depends on all of us.
Okay.
On our collective will to act and to demand better. We can't simply accept a world where impunity reigns.
We have a moral obligation to keep fighting for a world where the worst perpetrators are held accountable.
Right.
Regardless of who they are or where they come from.
That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity of all this.
It is.
And sometimes it feels like the problems are just too big to solve. But I think what you're saying is that we can't give in to that feeling of helplessness.
Right.
We have to keep pushing for a better future.
I completely agree.
Okay.
We've seen throughout history that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can find a way to push for justice and accountability.
Right.
The ICC, with all its imperfections, embodies that hope.
Yeah.
It's up to all of us to decide what comes next.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored the ICC's origins, its current struggles, and what its future might hold.
Right.
It's been a challenging conversation, but an incredibly important one. I hope it's left you with a deeper understanding of this complex institution and its crucial role in the pursuit of global justice.
That's my hope as well.
Okay.
And to everyone listening, I urge you to keep exploring these issues.
Okay.
Engage in the debate.
Right.
And consider what role you can play in shaping a more just and accountable world.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep fighting for a world where justice prevails.